Why are you eating lunch with the janitor? The question cut through the cafeteria louder than the hum of conversations, louder than the clatter of trays, louder than the soft jazz drifting from hidden ceiling speakers. For a brief second, dozens of eyes turned toward the corner table near the windows overlooking downtown Chicago. Some smirked. Others pretended not to look. A few exchanged knowing glances. Emily Carter froze with a paper cup of coffee halfway to her lips. Across from her sat an elderly building cleaner in a faded blue maintenance uniform. His gray hair was neatly combed. His hands were rough from years of work. His name badge read Walter Brooks. Emily felt the weight of the room settle around her, but Walter simply smiled and stirred a packet of sugar into his coffee as though nothing had happened. The man who had asked the question, a sales manager named Kevin Porter, laughed softly and shook his head. Seriously, Emily, you're spending your lunch break with the janitor. A few people nearby chuckled, not because the joke was funny, because laughing was easier than standing apart from the crowd. Emily glanced around the cafeteria. Reed Global Headquarters was the kind of place where appearance mattered. The 48-story glass tower stood like a monument to success in the heart of the city. Employees wore tailored suits. Executives moved through hallways with purpose. Every conversation seemed connected to numbers, contracts, or promotions. People noticed titles. They noticed corner offices. They noticed expensive watches. But they rarely noticed the people who emptied trash bins before sunrise or polished floors long after everyone else had gone home. Emily looked back at Walter. He lowered his eyes toward his coffee and continued eating his sandwich. For a moment, she saw something in his expression. Not embarrassment, not anger, just quiet acceptance. The kind that comes from being overlooked so often that it no longer surprises you. Something about that bothered her more than Kevin's comment. He has a name, Emily said calmly. The laughter faded. And his name is Walter. Kevin raised an eyebrow. Okay, Walter. More smiles. More amusement. Emily could feel the pressure building around her, the unspoken expectation that she should laugh too, that she should distance herself from the old cleaner and return to the safety of the crowd. Instead, she pushed a second coffee toward Walter. They finally got the hazelnut blend back, she said. Walter's eyes brightened. My favorite. It was a small moment. So small most people would forget it by the end of the day. But sometimes the smallest moments reveal the most about who people really are. Emily had only worked at Reed Global for 6 months. At 27 years old, she was still finding her place inside the massive corporation. She didn't come from wealth. She didn't have powerful connections. Her father had spent 30 years driving delivery trucks across Illinois. Her mother taught 3rd grade at a public school. Growing up, Emily learned something simple. Respect wasn't supposed to be reserved for important people. It was supposed to be given to everyone. Yet that lesson seemed strangely out of place inside Reed Global. Here, value often appeared tied to status. The higher someone climbed, the more attention they received. The lower they stood, the more invisible they became. Walter existed near the bottom of that invisible ladder. Every morning, Emily arrived at the office before 8. Every morning, Walter was already there. Sometimes vacuuming hallways. Sometimes replacing light bulbs. Sometimes carrying supplies that looked heavier than they should have been for a man nearing 70. Most employees walked past him without a glance. Some never acknowledged him at all. But Emily always said good morning. And every morning Walter answered with the same warm smile. Good morning, Miss Carter. It became a routine. Then conversations followed. 5 minutes here. 10 minutes there. Stories about Chicago winters. Stories about baseball games from decades ago. Stories about life. Nothing extraordinary. Yet somehow those conversations felt more genuine than many of the networking lunches she attended upstairs. As the cafeteria slowly returned to normal, Kevin shrugged and walked away. The audience disappeared. The moment seemed over. But Walter continued staring out the window toward the skyline. People are busy, he said quietly. Sometimes they forget to see what's right in front of them. Emily smiled. Their loss. Walter chuckled softly. Maybe. Then he took another sip of coffee and looked toward the bustling office tower beyond the glass. For just a second, there was something unusual in his eyes. Something thoughtful. Something observant. Almost as if he were seeing far more than anyone realized. Emily noticed it. She didn't know why. She didn't know what it meant. But before the afternoon was over, she would find herself wondering the same question that no one else in the building had ever bothered to ask. Who exactly was Walter Brooks? The afternoon sunlight stretched across the glass walls of Reed Global Headquarters, painting long golden reflections across polished marble floors. From the executive suites on the upper levels to the maintenance closets hidden behind service corridors, the building never truly rested. Phones rang. Elevators moved endlessly. Conversations about quarterly earnings and expansion strategies floated through conference rooms worth more than most family homes. Yet among the thousands of employees moving through the tower each day, very few people ever noticed the man quietly keeping everything running. Walter Brooks pushed his maintenance cart through the 42nd floor hallway just as another meeting ended. Executives poured from the conference room carrying tablets and leather portfolios. Several walked directly past him. Not one said hello. Not one acknowledged him. Walter simply stepped aside and let them pass. His expression never changed. If anything, he seemed accustomed to it. Emily noticed because she happened to be leaving a client briefing nearby. She watched as a vice president accidentally dropped a folder while checking messages on his phone. Papers scattered across the floor. Walter immediately bent down to help gather them. The executive accepted the folder without making eye contact and continued walking. No thank you. No smile. Nothing. Emily felt a knot tighten in her chest. It was not anger. It was disappointment. The kind that comes when people forget basic decency. Walter, however, appeared completely unfazed. He resumed pushing his cart toward the next hallway. Later that afternoon, Emily found him replacing a light fixture near the employee lounge. The old man stood on a small ladder, carefully securing a panel above his head. You know, Emily said, handing him a bottle of water, most people would be frustrated. Walter climbed down slowly and accepted the bottle with a grateful nod. About what? The way some people treat you. A faint smile appeared on his face. People usually reveal more about themselves than they realize. Emily laughed softly. That sounds like something a professor would say. Walter chuckled. Maybe I have spent a lot of time observing people. There was something unusual about the way he said it. Not proud. Not mysterious. Simply factual. As if observing people had been his life's work. Emily leaned against the wall. What do you see when you look around this place? Walter glanced through the glass toward the bustling office floor. Employees hurried between meetings. Managers discussed projects near workstations. Assistants coordinated schedules with practiced efficiency. Potential, he answered. And fear. Emily frowned. Fear. Many people spend their lives trying to become important. They worry constantly about losing whatever status they gain. His eyes followed a group of executives crossing the floor. The higher they climb, the more afraid they become. Emily considered his words. It sounded less like the opinion of a maintenance worker and more like someone who understood corporate life from the inside. Before she could ask another question, Walter surprised her again. You handled yourself well in the cafeteria? Emily blinked. You mean yesterday? Most people would have chosen the safer path. It was not difficult. Walter shook his head gently. Doing the right thing often becomes difficult when other people are watching. For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the building filled the silence. Keyboards clicking. Distant conversations. Elevator chimes. Then Walter looked at his watch and smiled. I should get back to work. Emily nodded. But her curiosity continued growing. Throughout the rest of the afternoon, small details began catching her attention. Walter seemed to know everyone's name, even people from departments he rarely visited. He knew which projects were succeeding, which teams were struggling, which managers had recently been promoted. At one point, she overheard him giving directions to a new employee. He described the company structure so precisely that it sounded like he had memorized the entire organizational chart. Then came the moment that truly made her pause. Around 5 o'clock, Emily entered an empty conference room searching for a misplaced notebook. Through the partially open door, she spotted Walter standing alone near the large city-facing windows. He was not cleaning. He was looking out over Chicago's skyline. Below him stretched miles of streets, office towers, and neighborhoods glowing beneath the fading sunlight. There was something about the way he stood there. Calm, thoughtful, familiar with the view, as though he had spent years looking down at the city from that exact height. Then the conference room phone rang. Walter answered it without hesitation. Good evening, he said politely. He listened for several seconds. His expression remained steady. No, he replied. Tell them to move the meeting to Thursday morning. It will be the better decision. Emily froze. The voice on the other end responded immediately. Walter nodded once. Excellent. Thank you. Then he hung up and walked away as if nothing unusual had happened. Emily stared at the phone. Her pulse quickened. A maintenance worker had just spoken with the confidence of someone giving instructions, not receiving them. And somehow, the person on the other end had listened. Emily spent the entire train ride home replaying the moment in her head. The conference room, the phone call, the certainty in Walter's voice. She had worked at Reed Global long enough to recognize how people spoke when they held authority. Managers asked. Directors suggested. Executives instructed. Walter had sounded like someone whose opinion carried weight. Yet by every visible measure, he was simply a building cleaner pushing a maintenance cart through quiet hallways. The contradiction lingered with her long after the city lights blurred past the train windows. The next morning, Chicago woke beneath low gray clouds. A cold breeze swept between skyscrapers as employees streamed toward Reed Global headquarters carrying coffee cups and laptop bags. Emily arrived just before 8 o'clock. As usual, Walter was already there. She spotted him near the lobby entrance polishing a brass handrail until it gleamed beneath the chandelier lights. Good morning, Walter. His face brightened instantly. Good morning, Miss Carter. You are here early. Somebody has to open the building before everyone else arrives. Emily smiled. Do you ever take a day off? Walter laughed softly. More often than people think. Before she could continue, a young delivery driver entered carrying 2 heavy supply boxes. The man looked exhausted. One of the boxes slipped slightly in his arms. Without hesitation, Emily stepped forward and helped steady the load. I have got it, the driver said. Thanks. You are carrying enough already, Emily replied. Together, they moved the boxes toward the reception area. It took less than 30 seconds. Most people would have forgotten the interaction immediately. Walter did not. As the driver left, he watched Emily for a moment before returning to his work. You do that often, he said. Do what? Help people when nobody is watching. Emily shrugged. My parents raised me that way. Walter nodded slowly, almost as if filing the answer away somewhere important. The morning passed quickly. Emails, meetings, deadlines. The familiar rhythm of corporate life resumed. Around noon, Emily headed toward the employee lounge to grab a quick sandwich. As she entered, she noticed Walter sitting alone at a small corner table. Most seats around him were empty despite the crowded room. People filled nearby tables but avoided the one beside him. Not out of hostility, simply habit. The habit of overlooking someone they considered unimportant. Emily walked directly over and sat down across from him. Mind if I join you? Walter smiled. Please. A few employees glanced over. Emily recognized the looks, the same mixture of curiosity and quiet judgment she had seen before. She ignored it. Walter unwrapped a simple turkey sandwich from wax paper. You know, he said, this used to be one of the busiest tables in the building. Emily laughed. When? A long time ago. His answer carried a strange weight. Not nostalgic exactly. More personal than that. Before Emily could ask what he meant, a loud voice interrupted from behind. There you are. Kevin Porter approached carrying a salad container and a confident grin. He looked at Walter, then at Emily. You really cannot help yourself, can you? Emily sighed. Good afternoon, Kevin. I am serious, Kevin continued. You spend more time talking to maintenance staff than networking. Several nearby employees listened while pretending not to. Kevin lowered his voice slightly. You know promotions do not come from eating lunch with janitors. Walter remained silent. Emily set down her drink. Maybe promotions are not the most important thing. Kevin laughed. Easy to say when you are still entry level. The remark hung in the air. Uncomfortable. Sharp. Yet Walter showed no reaction. He simply continued eating his sandwich. Kevin eventually shook his head and walked away. The room slowly returned to normal. Emily exhaled. Sorry about that. Walter folded his napkin carefully. Never apologize for another person's choices. Then he glanced toward the large windows overlooking the city. People reveal themselves over time, sometimes faster than they realize. Emily followed his gaze. Something told her he was talking about more than Kevin. Later that afternoon, she received a calendar notification for a major internal strategy presentation scheduled the following week. The project involved several senior leaders and could influence future promotions throughout the company. As Emily reviewed the meeting details, one name caught her attention. Jonathan Reed. Chairman. Founder. The man whose reputation shaped the entire organization. Employees spoke about him almost like a legend. Yet very few had ever met him. Emily stared at the name for a moment before continuing her work. Across the building, on the 48th floor, sunlight broke briefly through the clouds and illuminated the executive boardroom. And somewhere below, Walter Brooks quietly pushed his maintenance cart down another hallway, unnoticed by nearly everyone except the one person who had begun to wonder whether there was far more to him than anyone could see. By Wednesday morning, the questions in Emily Carter's mind had multiplied faster than the emails in her inbox. She had tried to dismiss them. She had told herself she was overthinking a few strange conversations. After all, buildings were full of interesting people. Not every mystery needed an answer. Yet the more she paid attention, the harder it became to ignore the growing list of things that simply did not make sense. It started shortly after 9 o'clock. Emily was reviewing quarterly reports when her supervisor stopped by her desk. "Have you seen the updated projection file?" he asked. "The executive version." Emily shook her head. "No, I only have the standard report." "Strange," he muttered. "The chairman's office requested revisions this morning." He walked away before she could ask another question. Chairman's office. The phrase lingered in her thoughts. Less than 30 minutes later, she stepped into an elevator heading toward the 36th floor. Just before the doors closed, Walter entered carrying a small toolbox. "Good morning," he said warmly. "Good morning," Emily replied. The elevator climbed in silence until it stopped on the executive floor. The doors opened. Standing outside was Rebecca Lawson, one of the company's senior vice presidents. Employees often described her as one of the most influential leaders in the organization. She noticed Walter immediately. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." Emily nearly looked behind her. Mr. Brooks. Not Walter. Not janitor. Not maintenance. Mr. Brooks. Even stranger, Rebecca's tone carried unmistakable respect. Walter smiled politely. "Good morning, Rebecca." She nodded before stepping aside to let him exit first. Emily stared as the doors closed again. Her pulse quickened. Rebecca Lawson barely acknowledged most employees. Yet she had addressed Walter like a valued colleague. The rest of the morning brought even more surprises. Around lunchtime, Emily headed toward the outdoor terrace for fresh air. Chicago's skyline stretched beneath a bright blue sky, sunlight reflecting off glass towers in every direction. She found a bench overlooking the river and opened her lunch. A few minutes later, she noticed Walter standing alone near the railing. He appeared deep in thought. As she watched, a young intern approached him carrying a stack of folders. The intern looked nervous. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "Could you tell me where conference room Delta is?" Walter smiled. "Third hallway on your left. Take the elevator to floor 42. You will make it with 3 minutes to spare." The intern thanked him and hurried away. Emily laughed softly. "You know this building better than anyone." Walter turned toward her. "Buildings are easy. What is difficult?" For a brief moment, his eyes drifted toward the city beyond the terrace. "People." Emily expected him to elaborate. He did not. Instead, he changed the subject and asked about her family. The conversation lasted only 10 minutes, yet Emily left feeling as though she had learned nothing and everything at the same time. That afternoon, the mystery deepened further. Around 3 o'clock, a company-wide email appeared announcing a surprise executive strategy session scheduled for Friday morning. Attendance would be limited to senior leadership and selected project teams. Emily's name was included. So was her department manager's. The message ended with a note that caught everyone's attention. Chairman Jonathan Reed would personally attend. Within minutes, conversations erupted throughout the office. Employees speculated about major acquisitions, restructuring plans, and leadership changes. The excitement spread across every floor. Even Kevin Porter seemed unusually energized. "This could be huge," he announced near the break room. "People get noticed during meetings like this." Emily nodded politely and returned to her desk, but her thoughts remained elsewhere. Near 5 o'clock, she walked through a quiet corridor and noticed the door to an executive conference room standing slightly open. Inside, several senior leaders sat around a polished table reviewing documents. Emily only glanced for a second before continuing past. Yet in that brief moment, she saw something that stopped her cold. On the large presentation screen was a photograph. Not a chart, not a graph. A photograph. The image showed an older man standing beside the original Reed Global headquarters nearly 30 years earlier. The photo was grainy and faded, but the face was unmistakable. Emily froze in the hallway. The man in the photograph looked exactly like Walter Brooks. Before she could take a second look, someone inside the room stepped forward and closed the door. Emily stood frozen in the hallway long after the conference room door had closed. The image she had seen lasted only a second, maybe less. Yet she could not shake it from her mind. The photograph had shown a younger version of Walter Brooks standing beside the original Reed Global headquarters. Not someone who merely worked there. Someone who belonged there. Someone important enough to be included in a presentation shown to senior executives. The thought followed her through the remainder of the afternoon. By the time she left the office, downtown Chicago glowed beneath the orange light of sunset. Traffic crawled along the streets below. The city felt alive. But Emily's attention remained fixed on a single question. Who was Walter Brooks really? The next morning brought even more uncertainty. Reed Global buzzed with anticipation for Friday's executive strategy session. Employees moved faster. Managers appeared more focused. Entire departments seemed determined to impress leadership. Rumors traveled through hallways like electricity. Some believed a major acquisition would be announced. Others expected leadership changes. Nobody knew the truth. Shortly after arriving, Emily noticed something unusual. Walter's maintenance cart sat parked near the lobby, but Walter himself was nowhere to be seen. An hour passed, then another. For the first time since she had started working at Reed Global, she could not find him anywhere. Around lunchtime, she finally spotted him stepping out of a restricted executive corridor. The area required special access credentials that most employees never received. Walter carried nothing except a small notebook tucked beneath his arm. As he emerged, two senior executives passed by. Both greeted him with polite nods. One even held the door open for him. Emily watched from a distance. The scene lasted only seconds, but it confirmed what she had already begun to suspect. Something about Walter existed far outside the role everyone assumed he played. Later that afternoon, another moment deepened the mystery. Emily entered a conference room to prepare documents for Friday's strategy session. The room overlooked the Chicago River from nearly 600 feet above the city. Through the glass walls, clouds drifted slowly across the skyline. She placed presentation folders around the table and began arranging name cards. Then she stopped. One card caught her eye. Jonathan Reed, Chairman, Founder. Directly beside it sat another card. The name printed beneath the company logo made her heart skip. Walter Brooks. Emily stared at it. She picked up the card to make sure she was reading it correctly. Walter Brooks. No title. No explanation. Just the name. Her pulse quickened. Before she could process what she was seeing, footsteps approached from the hallway. She quickly returned the card to its place. Rebecca Lawson entered carrying several reports. Everything ready? She asked. Emily nodded. Almost. Rebecca glanced toward the table. Good. Then she carefully adjusted the seating arrangement. To Emily's surprise, she moved Walter's name card closer to the chairman's position. Not across the table. Beside it. The gesture seemed small. Yet inside organizations like Reed Global, seating arrangements carried meaning. Important meaning. Emily wanted to ask questions. Hundreds of them. But she remained silent. The rest of the day unfolded beneath a growing sense of anticipation. Employees continued preparing for Friday's meeting. Executives moved between floors. Assistants coordinated schedules. Everyone seemed focused on the future. Yet nobody appeared aware of the secret sitting quietly in plain sight. Near the end of the afternoon, Emily found Walter standing alone in the lobby beside a large window overlooking the city. Rain had begun falling outside, covering the glass with silver streaks. For several moments, neither spoke. Finally, Walter broke the silence. You look thoughtful today. Emily smiled nervously. Maybe. Walter nodded. Questions have a way of finding us. She looked at him carefully. And answers? Answers usually arrive when people are ready for them. The response felt deliberate, not evasive, almost reassuring, as if he knew exactly what she was wondering. A group of employees crossed the lobby behind them, laughing and discussing Friday's meeting. Walter watched them disappear toward the elevators. Then he turned back to the rain-covered skyline. Interesting times ahead, he said softly. Emily followed his gaze. The city stretched endlessly beneath dark clouds and distant lights. For reasons she could not explain, She suddenly felt as though she were standing at the edge of something much larger than a corporate meeting. Somewhere inside Reed Global, pieces were moving into place. A hidden story was approaching its moment of truth. And when Friday morning arrived, nothing inside the building would look quite the same again. Friday arrived beneath a blanket of steel-gray clouds hanging over Chicago. The city looked quieter than usual, as if even the skyline was waiting for something to happen. Inside Reed Global headquarters, the atmosphere felt completely different. Employees moved through the building with unusual urgency. Elevators filled quickly. Conference rooms buzzed with anticipation. Everywhere Emily Carter looked, people were talking about the executive strategy session scheduled for 10 o'clock. Some hoped for promotions. Others feared restructuring. Nobody seemed certain what the day would bring. By 8:30, Emily was already at her desk reviewing materials one final time. Her inbox overflowed with updates and last-minute revisions. Yet despite the workload, her attention kept drifting toward one question. Where was Walter? Normally, she would have seen him at least twice by now. He would have been greeting employees in the lobby, checking maintenance schedules, or sharing a quiet cup of coffee before the day began. This morning, there was no sign of him. At 9:15, she walked through the first-floor atrium. Nothing. At 9:30, she checked the employee lounge. Empty. By 9:45, she found herself scanning hallways almost without realizing it. Walter Brooks had vanished. The absence felt strangely unsettling. Shortly before 10 o'clock, Emily headed toward the executive conference center on the 48th floor. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Around her stood department heads, directors, and senior managers reviewing notes in silence. The higher the elevator climbed, the quieter everyone became. When the doors opened, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Chicago skyline. Soft lighting reflected across polished marble floors. Assistants directed attendees toward the main boardroom. The room itself looked impressive even by Reed Global standards. A long walnut table stretched nearly 30 feet from end to end. Large screens displayed company performance metrics. Bottled water and presentation folders sat neatly arranged at every seat. Emily found her assigned place near the middle of the room. As people entered, conversations remained polite but restrained. Everyone appeared focused. Everyone except Kevin Porter. He seemed energized by the opportunity. Big day, he whispered to several colleagues. The people who stand out today are the people leadership remembers. A few nodded in agreement. Emily ignored the discussion and glanced toward the front of the room. Her eyes immediately found the place cards she had noticed the previous day. Jonathan Reed, Walter Brooks. Both remained exactly where she remembered. Side by side. Her heartbeat quickened. More executives entered. Rebecca Lawson took her seat. Several vice presidents followed. Yet the two seats at the head of the table remained empty. 10 o'clock arrived. Then 10:05. A low murmur spread through the room. Something felt unusual. Jonathan Reed was known for punctuality. 10:10 arrived. Still no chairman. Then the doors opened. Everyone turned. A senior assistant entered carrying a folder. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced. "Mr. Reed will join us shortly." The room settled again. Emily scanned the faces around her. Some looked confused. Others impatient. Yet one thing stood out immediately. Nobody seemed concerned about Walter's absence. Almost as if many people already knew something she did not. Minutes later, another development shifted the mood entirely. An executive presentation began. Financial projections appeared on the screens. Growth forecasts, expansion strategies, market opportunities. Yet midway through the presentation, a slide unexpectedly appeared showing internal employee engagement metrics. The room grew quieter. Several statistics revealed troubling patterns. Departments with the highest turnover. Teams reporting low morale. Surveys highlighting concerns about workplace culture. Then another slide appeared. Respect across organizational levels. The title alone seemed to catch everyone's attention. Data filled the screen. Anonymous employee feedback. Observations. Internal reviews. The message became increasingly clear. Reed Global excelled at business performance. Yet something deeper was being evaluated. Something involving character. Something involving how people treated one another. Emily glanced around the room. Many attendees appeared uncomfortable. Kevin shifted in his chair. Rebecca Lawson remained expressionless. At the front of the room, the presenter closed the report and stepped aside. Silence followed. Then the doors opened once more. This time, every conversation stopped instantly. Not because of who entered, but because of who did not. Jonathan Reed was nowhere in sight. Instead, a single familiar figure walked calmly into the boardroom, wearing the same simple suit he had worn countless times before, moving with the same quiet confidence. Walter Brooks stepped through the doorway alone. Without a word, he walked toward the head of the table, and every executive in the room rose to their feet. For several long seconds, nobody moved. The entire boardroom stood frozen beneath the glow of recessed lights and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago. The silence felt heavier than any speech. Walter Brooks continued walking toward the head of the table with the same steady pace Emily had seen countless times in the hallways below. The same calm expression, the same quiet dignity. Yet everything had changed. Around the room, vice presidents, department heads, and senior executives remained standing. Not out of confusion, out of respect, deep respect. Emily felt her pulse racing. Across the table, Kevin Porter looked as though he had forgotten how to breathe. Walter reached the front of the room and paused beside the empty chair reserved for Jonathan Reed. Then something happened that erased any remaining doubt. Rebecca Lawson stepped forward first. "Good morning, Mr. Reed." The words landed like thunder. Several executives nodded immediately. Others smiled. Nobody appeared surprised. Nobody except the handful of employees who had never known the truth. Emily felt the room tilt beneath her understanding. Walter Brooks, the building cleaner, the man who carried tools through hallways, the man who sat alone in the cafeteria, the man everyone overlooked. Jonathan Reed, founder, chairman, the person whose name stood on the side of the building itself. Walter smiled gently and motioned for everyone to sit. Chairs slid across the floor almost in unison. The room settled into complete silence once again. "Thank you for being here," he said. His voice sounded exactly as it always had. Warm, measured, unhurried. Yet now every word carried unmistakable authority. "Many of you have spent the last few days preparing for a business presentation." He paused and looked around the room. That presentation has already happened. Confused expressions appeared throughout the audience. Walter continued. "The numbers matter. Strategy matters. Growth matters. But those things were never the primary purpose of this week." He stepped away from the table and slowly walked toward the windows overlooking the city. "For the last 6 months, I have spent time inside this building under a different role. Not because I enjoy cleaning floors." A ripple of nervous laughter moved through the room. Walter smiled. "Although I have learned that clean floors are often underappreciated." The laughter faded quickly. "I wanted to see something for myself. Not quarterly reports. Not performance reviews. People." The room became completely still. "I wanted to see how employees treated individuals who could offer them nothing in return." Nobody spoke. Nobody looked comfortable. Walter's eyes moved calmly across the room. Titles create interesting behavior. Power creates interesting behavior. Status creates interesting behavior. Remove those things and human character becomes much easier to recognize. Emily noticed several executives lowering their gaze. Others shifted uneasily in their seats. Walter continued speaking with the same calm voice he used during ordinary lunchtime conversations. "Some employees ignored me completely." He nodded. "That was expected." "Some treated me politely." Another nod. "That was appreciated." Then he paused. "And a very small number treated me with genuine kindness." The silence deepened. Emily felt her heartbeat growing louder. Walter slowly turned toward her side of the room. Not directly at her. Not yet. But close enough to make her stomach tighten. "Kindness is fascinating," he said softly. "Because it costs almost nothing. Yet it reveals everything." Across the table, Kevin Porter stared at the polished wood surface in front of him. The confidence he usually carried had completely disappeared. Walter returned to the head of the room. This company was never built on profit alone. It was built on values. Respect. Integrity. Humility. He placed both hands lightly on the back of his chair. And values only matter when nobody important appears to be watching. Those words seemed to hang in the air. Emily immediately remembered the cafeteria, the coffee, the conversations, the countless small moments she had never considered significant. Around the room, many employees appeared to be replaying their own interactions with the man they had assumed was nothing more than a maintenance worker. Walter glanced toward the executive team. "Over the coming months, there will be changes." The statement immediately captured everyone's attention. Not because our business is struggling. He smiled. Our business is doing quite well. Several people chuckled nervously. The changes will focus on something more important. Culture. He paused once more. Because successful companies are built by talented people. Exceptional companies are built by good people. Then his eyes finally settled directly on Emily Carter. Not briefly, not accidentally, deliberately. And in that moment, every person in the room followed his gaze. The room remained silent as every eye shifted toward Emily Carter. She felt heat rise to her face. For a brief moment, she wished she could disappear into the chair beneath her. Yet Jonathan Reed, the man she had known as Walter Brooks, continued looking at her with the same calm expression she had seen over countless cups of coffee and quiet conversations. Then he smiled. "Miss Carter," he said gently, "would you please stand?" Emily swallowed hard and slowly rose from her seat. Around her, executives, managers, and department leaders watched closely. The attention felt overwhelming. Jonathan stepped away from the head of the table and walked toward the center of the room. "Most people believe leadership is easy to recognize," he said. "They think it comes with titles, offices, reserved parking spaces, and executive privileges." A few nervous smiles appeared around the table. But true leadership usually reveals itself in much smaller moments. He paused. Moments that most people never notice. The room remained completely still. Jonathan turned toward Emily. "Over the last 6 months, I have had hundreds of interactions inside this building. Thousands, if I count simple observations. Many people treated me politely once they believed I might be useful. Some treated me respectfully when others were watching." He paused again. "But very few treated me kindly when they believed I had nothing to offer them." Emily felt her heartbeat quicken. Jonathan continued. "Miss Carter never knew who I was. She believed I was a building cleaner. She believed I spent my days maintaining hallways and emptying trash bins. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Yet she greeted me every morning. She remembered my name. She shared her lunch table when nobody else would. She listened when she had no reason to listen. And she showed respect when there was absolutely no reward attached to it." The words settled across the room with remarkable weight. Jonathan was not speaking loudly. He did not need to. Every person present understood the lesson. He slowly looked around the boardroom. Character is easiest to measure when there is no advantage involved. Several executives lowered their eyes. Kevin Porter stared at the table in front of him. Jonathan noticed, but did not single anyone out. "This was never about catching people doing something wrong," he said. "It was about discovering who they really are." He returned to the head of the room and picked up a small folder. 3 decades ago, when Reed Global operated from a single office, I made myself a promise. He opened the folder carefully. No matter how large the company became, I would never allow success to replace humanity. The city skyline stretched behind him through the massive windows. Rain clouds had begun breaking apart, allowing sunlight to spill across the glass towers outside. The timing felt almost symbolic. Jonathan removed a document from the folder. "Which brings me to an announcement." The room immediately focused. Effective next month, Reed Global will launch a company-wide leadership initiative centered on culture, mentorship, and employee development. Several executives exchanged surprised looks. Jonathan continued. "And the first person selected to help design that program will be Emily Carter." A collective murmur spread across the room. Emily blinked. For a moment, she wondered whether she had heard correctly. Jonathan smiled. "Not because she is the most senior employee. Not because she has the most experience. And certainly not because she expected recognition." He placed the document on the table. "Because she demonstrated the values this company claims to believe in." The silence that followed felt completely different from the silence earlier that morning. This was not confusion. It was understanding. One by one, people began nodding. Rebecca Lawson smiled openly. Several executives followed. Even those who looked uncomfortable seemed unable to argue with what they had witnessed. Jonathan's eyes settled on Emily one final time. "The future of a company is not determined by how people treat the chairman." His voice softened slightly. "It is determined by how they treat the person they believe nobody sees." And for the first time since entering the boardroom, Emily realized the meeting had never been about business at all. It had been about a truth far more valuable than any quarterly report. A truth that every person in the room would remember long after the numbers were forgotten. When the meeting finally ended, nobody rushed for the exits. The boardroom remained unusually quiet as people gathered their folders and exchanged thoughtful glances. The energy that had filled the room earlier that morning was gone. In its place stood something deeper. Reflection. Emily Carter remained seated for a moment, still trying to absorb everything that had happened. Just a week earlier, she had been sharing coffee with a man everyone believed was a maintenance worker. Now she knew she had been speaking with the founder of a multi-billion-dollar company. Yet strangely, the revelation changed less than she expected. Jonathan Reed was still the same person who listened more than he spoke. The same person who remembered small details. The same person who treated everyone with quiet respect. As the room gradually emptied, Emily gathered her notes and stood. "Miss Carter." She turned. Jonathan stood near the windows overlooking Chicago. Sunlight now poured across the skyline, turning the glass towers gold. "Would you join me for a moment?" Emily walked over. For several seconds, neither spoke. Together they looked out at the city below. Finally, Jonathan smiled. "You seem disappointed." Emily blinked. "Disappointed? Most people would be excited." She laughed softly. "I am excited. I just keep thinking about all the times I could have asked who you really were." Jonathan chuckled. "And if you had?" Emily considered the question. "I suppose things would have been different." "Exactly." His eyes remained fixed on the skyline. "The moment people learn your title, they often stop showing you who they truly are." The words settled gently between them. "You never treated me like a chairman," he continued. "You treated me like a person." Emily smiled. "Because that is what you were." Jonathan nodded. "And that is why this mattered." Over the following weeks, the story spread throughout Reed Global. Not through official announcements or company newsletters. Through conversations. Employees shared what had happened with coworkers. Managers discussed it during meetings. Teams reflected on the lessons they had learned. Something subtle began changing inside the organization. People started greeting the security staff by name. Employees who had once eaten alone found company at lunch tables. Small acts of courtesy appeared throughout the building. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make headlines. Yet those changes slowly transformed the culture Jonathan had spent decades building. Emily stepped into her new role helping develop the leadership initiative. The promotion came with additional responsibilities, but more importantly, it came with a new perspective. She discovered that influence did not begin with authority. It began with example. One afternoon, several months later, Emily walked through the first-floor lobby carrying a stack of reports. Near the entrance, she noticed a new building cleaner organizing supplies beside a maintenance cart. He looked nervous, still unfamiliar with the enormous headquarters. Employees hurried past without noticing him. Emily smiled and stopped. "Good morning." The young man looked surprised. "Good morning. How is your first week going?" His expression brightened immediately. "Honestly, better now." Emily laughed. They spoke for a few minutes before she continued toward the elevators. As the doors closed behind her, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the polished metal. For a moment, she remembered a different conversation, a different maintenance cart, a different morning, and she remembered something Jonathan Reed had once said. People reveal themselves over time, sometimes faster than they realize. High above the city, Reed Global continued growing. New projects launched. New leaders emerged. New opportunities appeared. But among all the achievements and accomplishments, one lesson endured. Not because it was written in a handbook, not because it was displayed on a wall, because people had lived it. The true measure of character is not how we treat those who can advance our careers, increase our status, or reward our efforts. It is how we treat the people we believe have nothing to give us. On the day Emily first shared a cup of coffee with an overlooked building cleaner, she thought she was offering a simple act of kindness. In reality, she was revealing something far more valuable. Herself. And in the end, that was the truth Jonathan Reed had been searching for all along.